Hello and welcome. We start with the latest from Madagascar. The military has taken power in the East African island nation. This after lawmakers impeached President Andry Rajoelina, who fled the country following days of anti-government protests led by Gen Z. The military says it will rule Madagascar for up to 2 years alongside a transitional government before organizing new elections. The army has dissolved all institutions except the lower house of parliament and the National Assembly.
On a pris la décision parce que j'ai expliqué ça plusieurs fois, parce qu'il n'y a rien qui marche à Madagascar, il n'y a pas de président, il n'y a pas de président du Sénat, il n'y a pas de gouvernement, il n'y a rien qui marche. Donc on doit prendre la responsabilité, en fait, c'est ça.
Allez-vous tenir des élections ?
Bien sûr, bien sûr. Au minimum dans les 18 mois, au maximum 24 mois.
Il s'agit donc d'un gouvernement de transition.
Voilà, c'est ça un peu.
Rajoelina had refused to step down despite the escalating demonstrations demanding his resignation. In an address to the nation on Monday, he said that he was in an unknown location, claiming his life had been threatened. Now, President Rajoelina was impeached by the lower house on Tuesday for desertion of duty. Later, the CAPSAT military unit announced it was in charge. Mass celebrations erupted on the streets after the military's announcement. In the capital of Antananarivo, thousands marched, danced, sang, and waved banners denouncing Rajoelina as a French stooge. They criticized his dual citizenship and ties to Madagascar's former colonizer.
They're really interfering with our personal affairs. There's no more state sovereignty, the French are still there. And secondly, our president applied for French nationality and that's how he was able to leave here.
It feels like we've just been released from prison. We know very well all the harm he has done. I'm truly relieved that Andry Rajoelina is no longer in power. This is also a message to his successor. Learn from this and don't make the same mistakes.
Demonstrations first erupted on the 25th of September over water and power shortages. They quickly escalated into a broader uprising against corruption, poor governance, and lack of basic services. The United Nations reported at least 22 people killed, though the government denied the figures. The anger mirrored recent youth-led protests in Kenya, Nepal, and Morocco, as well as Indonesia. Now, the protest took a turn over the weekend when the elite CAPSAT unit joined the demonstrations. And this is the same unit that played a major role in the 2009 coup that first brought Rajoelina to power. Rajoelina became the youngest head of state, coming to power at just 36 years of age. He was too young to legally assume the office, but his celebrity status gave him an advantage. The 51-year-old Rajoelina is a former DJ and media tycoon who owned a radio station. In 2007, he successfully ran for mayor of the capital of Antananarivo, and his party, known as the TGV, was a play on words from the French high-speed train, reflecting both the party initials and his rapid-fire personality. Now, rising in the opposition, he consistently clashed with then-President Marc Ravalomanana and branding his government as a dictatorship after it shut down his TV channel in 2008. Now, he positioned himself as an anti-establishment figure, mobilizing youth to take to the streets to oust an aging president. In 2009, the military backed him, toppling the then president and installing Rajoelina as the new leader. At the time, Malagasy youth cheered for him, and 16 years later, Gen Z citizens accused him of failing to deliver on his promises. Public frustration has deepened under Rajoelina's rule. Now, despite rich natural resources, 3/4 of the country's 30 million people live in poverty. Madagascar has experienced repeated political turbulence since independence from France in 1960. The military takeover marks a new chapter in Madagascar's political turmoil, leaving the future of the island nation uncertain. And for more on this, we have with us Musa Mdunge, who is an international affairs expert. He is joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Musa, as always, great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Colonel Andry Rajoelina has announced a 2-year transition period following the impeachment of President Rajoelina. From a constitutional and a legal standpoint, how legitimate is this military takeover, especially with only the National Assembly remaining intact?
Well, look, this is a very interesting case, right? In the sense that here you have a president who has been impeached by the National Assembly, which in and within itself is a constitutional process and is mandated. But the issue is not there. The issue lies now is you now have an unconstitutional action in that the military now has declared a political transition for 2 years, which has no basis under the Constitution by virtue of the fact that the first decision by the military is the suspension of the Constitution. So that causes challenges in terms of the legal legitimacy of this particular process. Secondly, by having, barring the National Assembly, all other organs of state basically dissolved, what you then have is you have a figure of democracy, a figurehead of democracy that really just doesn't stand. By what constitutional legal basis does the military then take the decisions it's going to make in the next 2 years? And so from a constitutional perspective, this does present a crisis if the military follows through with this 2-year period. What is expected to happen, I believe, is beyond the popular support for this move currently, is there will be pressure both internally and externally to involve either the judiciary or again establish some sort of a civilian rule in order to ensure that the decisions taken by the government of Madagascar are one that are legitimate, and one that do meet constitutional muster and setting.
Right. And given that this political shift follows weeks of the youth-led protests, how is the public likely to respond, or are they responding to this military rule? And could this transition plan ease or perhaps further inflame tensions on the streets?
Well, look, let's look at the historical precedents that has already been set, right? As you've already mentioned in your introduction, right? When we look at the 2009 coup d'etat, right, and what it set in motion, this is a country clearly where, coup d'etats don't live up to their master in that sense. And so the expectation is that while there's broad support, particularly from the Gen Zs at this particular moment, if the issues that brought them to the street initially are not resolved, we will find ourselves back here. The issues around service delivery, the issues around water, electricity, all of these matters are very key to the legitimacy of any either military or civilian power that is going to take over during this period. It really boils down to, will we have a government that meets the needs of the people? And so it is likely in this moment where there is no definitive civilian government, that there's a risk that other, either military organizations or groups will begin to form, and that can then complicate the peace process and a move towards again building a civilian stable government that will meet the interests of the people. So it all depends really here, Alyson, on how much pressure will be placed on the military leadership to get Madagascar towards a roadmap where we can have elections, and through those elections, then we can then have results and the new leadership come through in a different way than the 2009 coup d'etat, because again, it is that very coup d'etat, that foundation, that makes us find ourselves here again.
Right. And Musa, how might regional bodies like the African Union or SADC and international partners such as France or the UN, how might they react to Madagascar's military takeover and this proposed transition timeline of 2 years?
Well, look, global response has been mixed, right? And in many ways, perhaps at this moment, quite reserved. So, of course, if you look at the African Union, they've had a tradition of having a zero policy towards coup d'etats, a zero tolerance policy towards coup d'etats, and that is not likely to change in this particular instance. And it is likely that from the AU, even from SADC, that we will see a constellation of some form of a group of elders being called upon to go and assist in bringing about a political resolution to this conflict. France's response has been critical in this particular period, given the fact that, President Rajoelina is of course sanctioned to be in France, but also France as a former colonial power has very much an influential role in this particular moment. And it happens when the French themselves, Alyson, face their own constitutional crisis in the Fifth Republic. So it's going to be interesting to see what will be the influence of France's own internal domestic challenges in influencing and shaping the future of Madagascar in this particular moment. And then, of course, finally, we have the United Nations, and there again, it is likely to be a divided bag of views by the United Nations. But the movement towards sanctions is likely to be undertaken, especially if the military rule is seen as being undemocratic and seen as breaking international law. It is likely, therefore, that international response will be harsh. But for the moment, it really is a divide and see.
Right. Musa, it's always great to have you on the show. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Want the facts?
The latest developments?
News that gets straight to the point.
Well, we've got all three just for you. This is Firstpost Live, a brand new show, your window into what really matters.
Don't miss it.